Good morning again. I want to start this morning just by reading you something. Occasionally I come across something in my reading that I just think so good that I don't really want to paraphrase it or put it into my own words. So I'm going to read out something for you at length. It's by a Christian writer called Mark McIntosh in a book called Divine Teaching. And as we're with the Magi today, who were students, they spent their days studying the stars. What I'm going to read out is about studying. So let's just listen to this together. Consider the difference between studying the chemical composition of a rock and studying the psychology of a human person. It's true that in both cases, good scholars will grow fascinated by their objects of study and devoted to the truth about them that they're seeking to discover and understand. Really great scholars might even speak about trying to learn from the rock or from the human person, about letting the object of study become, in a sense, their teacher. But this is clearly going to be quite different in the two cases. The rock will speak only by means of an enigmatic silence, benign but undeniably stony. But the human person will be a much more active participant in the work, not simply filling out forms corresponding to the scholar's research template, but perhaps interrupting, correcting, transforming through conversation everything the scholar may have thought were the real data. And what if the person you were studying had especially peculiar habits, like severe sleepwalking, or refusing to talk with you except over gargantuan meals of fresh mussels in which you were required to partake? Pretty soon, if you really wanted to understand, you might begin to develop new habits yourself, allowing you to study your sleepwalking muscle eater more adroitly and naturally. At first, you would tell yourself, I'm not really a nocturnal person, and I don't really like mollusks of any kind whatsoever. Yet there you are, every evening, gorging with your research subject on mussels, and trailing along a few hours later through the darkness on a nightly ramble. What has happened? You have become, at least for study purposes, a learner, an apprentice to the object of your study, who has in fact become your teacher. And for a while at least, you have acquired something of a new way of being, new habits of existence that fit you for your study encounters. We could call these new habits your sleepwalking muscle eater research virtues. They are the dispositions that allow you a certain flourishing and even excellence as a student of sleepwalking muscle eaters. But now, suppose that you came across a research subject whose habits were even more peculiar still. Suppose that as you drew near this person, astonishingly, they told you about the truth of yourself. Both the truth you had been afraid to admit and yet a deeper truth you had never known but always longed to hear. Suppose this person was so available for you, so vulnerably honest and self-disclosing, and showed such fidelity towards your own work that you began to develop a high degree of faith in that person's essential goodness and reliability. Over time, such a research subject might engender a fair portion of both humility and hope within you, a sense that your study would indeed take you somewhere wonderful and real. And suppose that over time you began to catch glimpses of your research subject helping others with such generosity and breathtaking selflessness that you began to be inspired yourself, feeling a kindred sort of love for people, and gradually finding yourself able to converse with your subject more freely, to understand more deeply as you yourself begin to sense something of this passion your subject had for others. In such a case, you would indeed be studying a kind of apprenticeship, with your subject as your true teacher. Moreover, the research virtues that would have begun to grow in you, those habits equipping you to succeed in just being around and understanding this person, these virtues would have truly begun to transform you. Faith and hope and love taking root in you would point to a remarkable subject of study. There we are. I'll stop there. I really love that. I love that. If you hadn't picked it up, the mysterious person that Mark McIntosh is picturing, this generous and faithful and humble and loving and self-giving person who's transforming the people studying him, is none other than God. The God who has revealed himself and revealed his character in Jesus Christ. And what an amazing picture that is of what faith involves. Faith is basically like an apprenticeship to Jesus Christ that gradually transforms you into his likeness. Now, I thought that was appropriate today because something like this happened to the Magi. The Magi liked studying, and they ended up paying close attention to God. And by paying close attention, they were themselves altered by him. Let's just think about these Magi for a bit. And I think it's worth saying, just to begin with, that if we're honest, we know very little about them. We know very little about who the Magi really were and what they really did for a living. The picture of them that's built up over time doesn't clearly present itself from the Bible text. They weren't kings. There weren't three of them. They may not even have all been men. But what we do know is that whoever they were, they came from the East, which is a way of saying they're exotic, they're foreign, and importantly, they're not Jewish. We also know that they were rich. They were rich enough to afford to travel with an expensive cargo of lavish gifts. They were important enough, or again, perhaps just simply rich enough to find a quick audience with the local Roman ruler, Herod. And finally, we know they were scholars, people of learning and study, who had spotted a star in the east that they believe spoke of a new king for the Jews. But what we also know about them from this passage is that they underwent a great change. They were changed by the God they sought. If the Magi are mysterious and weird to begin with, by the time they've met the baby Jesus and then exited the narrative, they've become even weirder. Let's read what happened. It says, "On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route." It's so familiar to us, this narrative. We hear it year on year. Our little kids acted out at nativities. But this behavior is strange. It's weird. It's weirder than all the other weird things that we do nowadays for babies, like gender reveal parties or baby showers. This is weirder still. From gazing up at the stars, these men are now falling down before a baby. From the religions of their homeland, they're now straying in the presence of the God of the Jews. From lives of pomp and luxury, they're now sharing their wealth in a hovel in a bland town with a young mum and her illegitimate child. From seeking out a king in glitzy Jerusalem, now they leave avoiding a king, exiting out of the back door of backwater Bethlehem. Weird, but wonderful. Do you see what's happened to these people. These magi have become apprentices of God, and God has changed them. God has actually turned them upside down. God has made them more like God, extravagant in love and humility. By becoming flesh in Jesus, the God who created the universe has shown us what he's like. And he's shown us that he's extravagant. Not only has God humbled himself to our level, in fact, God has humbled himself below our level. The child Jesus was in less security and more squalor than the dirty shepherds with their fields and routines. He had less than the magi with all their wealth and their learning. And when he grew up, he died for us in a condition that is far less than anyone deserves. God's humility and love is weird. It's too much. Not only is there no distance God won't travel and descend to reach us, but in Jesus, God has gone lower than us, so that when we fall, he's already there. This is the mysterious character of God: extravagant love, extravagant humility. And the Magi have been drawn into that character through their quite innocent study. One morning, they got a whiff of God as they studied their star charts. Not long after, they were whiffing dirty nappies as they met God face to face. Poor guys mustn't have known what had hit them. But here's the scary thing. This apprenticeship that the Magi took on, that turned their lives upside down, that completely changed them, this is the primary vocation of every one of us. This is your calling. You exist because God wants you to exist. And the purpose of your existence is to be his apprentice and become like him. Humble, full of love, full of joy, not shirking the dark and the dirt of this world, patient in suffering, generous to an extravagant degree. That's you. In your own way, that's what God has for you. So will you take that apprenticeship? We're at the beginning of a new year, and I think I wanted to talk about this because in a way this is Christianity 101. Apprenticing yourself to God and being formed by him. Sometimes, I know I do, maybe you do, we can get a bit tied in knots thinking, I'm a Christian. What should I be doing? What's happening next? What does God want for me now? What should I do? Well, don't worry. Take a breath. Look what's in front of you. The shepherds responded to God's call while watching over their sheep. The Magi responded to God's call while watching their stars. In just the same way, your job, your life's work, is simply to pay attention to God as you watch over your own business as usual. Your family, your work, your relationships, your habits, your hobbies, your loves. That is where the apprenticeship begins. And God's work of making you like him begins right there too. In the midst of normal life, paying attention to God by maintaining just simple rhythms of coming back to prayer, the simple rhythm of coming back to silence or quiet time, coming back to reading the Bible, coming back to kindness, coming back to church week on week. Those are the simple rhythms of our apprenticeship that will change us, that will turn us upside down and make us like the God who reveals himself in Jesus. So if in doubt, come back to those rhythms. This year, if you're thinking, I don't really know what God has for me, come back to those rhythms. Remember, you are God's apprentice first and foremost. That's your job, to pay attention to him in your daily life. And God will form you and transform you into who you're meant to be.